What's up? We have got an awesome video today because we are talking about not one nor two, but three Canon video cameras within about $1,000 of each other at the introductory cinema price point, the Canon R5C, the C70, and the R5 Mark II. And full disclosure, I think one of these cameras is amazing. It seems to do everything pretty well. One of them is pretty good. It's got some shortcomings that are balanced by some really strong attributes. And one of these cameras, I just can't get jazzed about. And that camera has a very big following online. So what I want to do, rather than spend this whole video dumping on a camera that might be your favorite camera or is perfectly suited for your use case, I'm just gonna present the facts and stick to video sample reviews so you can draw your own opinion. So it is my aspiration that by the end of this video, you won't even know which of these cameras I own, and let alone which ones I like. So Canon EOS R5C, C70, R5 Mark II, let's not talk about it. Okay, so if I'm not here to opine on these cameras, why am I making this video? I think that is a good question that will help introduce the discussion. So first off, the releases of these cameras spans back all the way to 2020. There is a broad range of technological capabilities in this suite. And in that time, the C70 and the R5C have each received consequential firmware updates that have benefited the image quality in ways that might not be reflected in the majority of the review content on YouTube, because those reviews tend to come out right after the camera releases. So for example, the C70 has received a firmware update allowing it to shoot raw video. It did not initially have that capability, and the R5C received an update to bring it into compliance with the standards for Netflix original productions, and that has also had a benefit to the dynamic range of the camera that may not be reflected in older reviews. So I really thought that someone comparing the R5 to these cameras should have footage that represents the contemporaneous capabilities of the cameras to look at. And so there will be review footage that looks at, for example, the raw capabilities of the C70 compared to the raw footage from these cameras following the discussion. But first, I think we need to introduce the cameras, because that is the second reason that I'm making this video. Because if you were assessing the modernity or longevity of the cameras and looking at their release dates, you might sort of look at them like this. The C70 came out first, then the R5C, and then the R5 Mark II. However, if you were looking at maybe dynamic range capabilities, you might assess it more like this. Or if you were looking at price point, which I think is also a fair way to look at the cameras, you might see them more like, depending on the current sale price. Or, all right, starting with the C70, it is the largest of the cameras. It's got a cinema-friendly form factor with lots of dedicated buttons. The C70 records onto two SD cards. All of the featured resolutions are up to 4K, so it can record in 4K resolution up to 120 frames per second. It can shoot in RAW up to 4K 60 frames per second, and in its 10-bit 422 codec in C-Log2 up to 4K 120 frames per second. It has no sensor stabilization. It uses the larger cinema-style BPA30 and BPA60 batteries. There's an integrated fan for unlimited recording times. It supports monitoring through the attached LCD or the full-size HDMI port. There is no viewfinder on the C70. In terms of the menu and the other ergonomics, it uses the Cinema operating system. Like I said, the form factor is large with a big selection of dedicated buttons that will dive right into a needed menu setting and full audio controls. Speaking of audio, a standout feature of the C70 are the two integrated mini XLR microphone ports that provide phantom power to the microphones. To get this functionality from the R5C or the R5 Mark II, you'll have to use the Tascam top handle attachment. The C70 also exclusively features 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 stops of internal ND integrated into the camera. Moving into the R5C will get you a CF Express Type B card in addition to an SD card that can be used for photos or low resolution backups, unlike the two SD cards on the C70. The R5C can shoot all the way up to 8K resolution with 6K and 4K crop modes. That's windowing down to Super 35 and Super 16mm sensor size. So you can shoot this in RAW at 8K up to 60 frames per second, and you can also shoot in 10-bit 422 at 4K up to 120 frames per second. 120 frames per second is the maximum frame rate of the R5C. Like I said, it can shoot at 8K RAW. When windowing down to Super 35, it can also shoot at 6K RAW. That's an exclusive feature of this camera. Like the C70, there is no mechanical stabilization, only digital stabilization. The R5C uses the smaller LPE6 series batteries. The R5C features an integrated fan for essentially unlimited recording time in all modes. And in addition to the articulating LCD, the R5C also features an electronic viewfinder. However, external monitoring is only via the micro HDMI port. Settings changes on the R5C are managed through the Cinema operating system when shooting in the video mode, and through the Stills operating system when shooting in Stills mode. There is a delay when switching between these modes to boot the separate operating systems. There is no neutral density filtration on the R5C. Like the R5C, the R5 Mark II features a CF Express Type B and an SD card slot, and it features an 8K sensor. However, this is a stacked architecture sensor that allows it to shoot 8K 60 RAW, 4K 120, and 2K up to 240 frames per second. Note that this can shoot 8K RAW or 4K RAW without imposing an additional crop, and all of the other modes are available in a 10-bit 422 format. The R5 Mark II is the only camera out of this bunch to have a mechanical stabilization system that moves the sensor, as well as digital stabilization. It's powered by the LPE6P battery almost exclusively, and cooling is only passive, but there is a fan grip accessory to significantly extend the runtime in all recording modes. You can monitor the R5 Mark II via the articulating screen or the EVF. However, unlike the R5C, the R5 Mark II can also support external monitoring through a full-size HDMI port. Ergonomically, the R5 Mark II is the smallest of the cameras. It is managed through the Stills menu system throughout, with very little lag when switching from stills to video. Like the R5C, there is no ND built into the R5 Mark II. Sorry, I've got to bust in here. I was editing my stills comparison video together for the R5C and the R5 Mark II. It occurred to me I didn't talk about stills and a few other things. So the R5C and the R5 Mark II both shoot 45 megapixel stills with some nuances for the capabilities. Again, this isn't a video about stills. If you want to learn more about stills, maybe subscribe and come back to see my stills comparison. But the C70, I mean, it shoots like 8 megapixel JPEGs with no shutter. So it's not really a strong stills camera. I think maybe I'll just make a chart. I'll make a chart, and if a camera is the best at something, I'll put it in green. And if it's the worst at something, I'll put it in red. And if it's kind of the same as one of the other cameras, red, I'll just put it in yellow so you can kind of quickly gauge which camera was best at something you might be interested in. So other things I didn't talk about, the C70 doesn't shoot stills, but it does have a technology called dual gain output. And so that allows the camera to capture a larger dynamic range. So you can look at the sample footage, which is coming up, and gauge whether or not that's sort of an important technology for you. The R5C does, however, have a dual base ISO at ISO 3200, and the R5 II has sort of a cleanup ISO at ISO 4000. The R5C only captures in the C-Log3 gamma, which is sort of Canon's intermediate dynamic range gamma, whereas the C70 and the R5 Mark II both capture in C-Log2, the full dynamic range gamma. Okay, so I mentioned that if you put the newer LPE6P batteries in the R5C that it extends the runtime, but what I didn't mention is that and this is kind of in flux right now, there's a firmware update last week that also allows the LPE6P battery to do some of the things that the R5C previously required an external power source to do, such as recording 8K 60 RAW with autofocus. So that's something I didn't bring up at all, and you'll want to see sort of what the current status of the camera power solutions are. But currently, I don't think the R5C is shipping with the LPE6P battery. You may need to buy an extra battery or devise a compatible external USB-C power delivery solution if you want to use the highest features of the camera. Also, while we're talking about autofocus, the R5C and the C70 both use sort of a conventional cinema face and eye tracking autofocus. The R5 II has sort of the full complement of animal and vehicle, etc. Subject tracking detection modes. Okay, back to the video. Hopefully that's clear as mud. Some people might be frustrated that there are so many different offerings in this lineup with so many different capabilities, but personally, I find the game of kind of teasing out which camera plugs best into which role, you know, kind of for which amount of the budget, I find that kind of fun. And maybe the best way to demonstrate that is that all of these cameras are in the RF mount. Now the C70, like we said, has a smaller super 35mm sensor, and you could use EF lenses and a speed booster to achieve a near full frame field of view on the C70. The C70 has built-in neutral density filters. The R5C and the R5II don't, so you could use EF lenses and a filter adapter, like this one, to do filtration behind the lens with an adapter and use EF lenses. Now, all of those are solutions that will keep these cameras operating in a near cinema camera capacity that will not allow you to use RF lenses and achieve a full frame field of view with a full spectrum of neutral density filters. If you need that capability, right, you have that in higher end Canon cinema cameras, especially last year with the introduction of the C400 and C80 platform. So none of these cameras is like a silver bullet to solve every video production problem, but with the right consideration, all of these cameras are really good at solving certain problems, and I think that's great. So as promised, we'll roll into some footage that demonstrates the differences in video quality with the cameras. I will let you judge that for yourself, but until I see you next time, you guys keep an eye out and a foot forward, and thanks for watching. Bye.